Welcome to GRE. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. I answer your listener questions today. A 12-year-old listener asks, how many properties must I own to become a millionaire? Another asks, should my first property be a house hack or an out-of-state rental? One question is about the imminent prospect of hyperinflation. Also, what are the forward-looking indicators to find the best future real estate markets? Those questions and more questions all answered today on Get Rich Education.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Hey, welcome in to GRE. I'm your host and founder, in fact, of this very show and all Get Rich Education platforms, a 20-year real estate investor and active member of the Forbes Real Estate Council. My name is Keith Weinhold. You probably know that by now. This is episode 445 of Get Rich Education. When I do these listener question episodes, I generally begin with some of the more basic questions. Today's first question comes from Taylor in Wooster, Ohio. Taylor is age 12, and he simply asks, how many properties must I own to become a millionaire? Well, thanks for that, Taylor. I don't often get questions from a 12-year-old. I love that you are listening, and the fact that you are greatly then increases the chances of you building wealth when you're an adult, yet young enough to enjoy it. Like a lot of questions in real estate, the answer to how many properties you must own to become a millionaire, it depends, all right? It depends on how profitable your properties are, how much they go up in value, and how much you're getting from the rents that you charge the tenants, how long you do a good job of keeping them as tenants, as well as how capable you are of controlling your property's expenses. So you could own as little as just one property and be a millionaire, Taylor. Owning more properties is better than owning fewer properties. That way, if you have one that isn't profitable, you are going to have profits that still come in from your other properties. And you can own more properties when you use part of your own money and part of the bank's money in owning the property. Now, Taylor, if you have $1 million, say that you just had $1 million in stacks all stuffed in your closet. You need to understand that that is not enough. You're 12 years old now. You might live another 80 years. Well, then you'd need that million to last you 80 years. Well, even a 50-year-old with $1 million stack of dollar bills in their closet, they would not have enough money to live on for the rest of their life. You might need closer to $10 million. That's called a decamillionaire. So think about setting your net worth target higher. Think perhaps then, how can I be a decamillionaire? But actually, you don't want to just think about the height of your stack of dollar bills reaching any certain number of millions only. I mean, that matters, but what matters more is how fast your stacks are growing. That's called cash flow. If your stacks are growing at a rate every year that meets or exceeds all of your expenses, then you are financially free. That's why it beats being debt-free. Another thing, Taylor, I know that your hometown of Wooster, Ohio, it's between Columbus and Akron. So although I'm not intimately familiar with Wooster at all, but I do know it's the county seat of Wayne County, you do tend to have markets nearby that can create cash flow really well. That's that ability to grow your cash stacks, hopefully to a height of $10 million someday. Thanks for your question, Taylor. It warms my heart to know that kids listen to the show. I remember shortly after launching the show back in 2014 that a dad and a son from New Jersey, they wrote in and they told us that they look forward to listening to the show together every week. And I like to do that family-friendly show from day one, a clean lyrics show since Inception. I like to keep it classy. I like to make that show that would make my late grandma Weinhold proud, although she never really knew how to listen to this show or watch it, and that's part of my brand, and it warms my heart to see children in the audience like this. The next question comes from Mitrel. I don't know where Mitrel is from because some of our questions come in on our YouTube channel, but he says, I have a good job and $40,000 saved up, and I expect an upcoming boom in real estate, and I need $100,000 for a down payment. So does it make sense to gamble my $40K in the high-risk stock market to get up to the $100K sooner and then capitalize on the real estate purchase? If I lose the $40K, I'll recover it in time with my job over time anyway. If I win and I get it to $100K fast, I'll have my income property and I'll be off to the races with leverage in real estate pays 5 ways. If I simply tried to preserve the $40K in a savings account, I would lose that to inflation. All right, that's his question. Good, Mitrel. Okay, you've got $40K. You want to get to $100K for your down payment on some rental property. Now, we have properties at GRE Marketplace where $30 or $35K is enough to get started. But with your $100K down payment for a property goal, I kind of sense that you have a specific purchase in mind. Of course, it's about getting your 20 to 25% down payment plus about 4% in closing costs. Those are as percentages of your purchase price, and you're going to want to hold on to some reserves as well. Well, to get your cash stash from $40K up to $100K, it has to do with your risk tolerance, Mitrel. It sounds like you're open to risk with putting it in the stock market short term for you to try to reach your goal faster. So yeah, you would probably want to do that outside of a retirement account since they generally have early withdrawal penalties. In a savings account, yes, you're aware that with true inflation, you would just debase your savings purchasing power. If you're open to risk, I guess one could get in and out of crypto at just the right time. If you do that, I'd choose Bitcoin. But, whether you go with something risky like stocks or Bitcoin, the problem with that is that you have to get your timing right twice. Ideally, whether it's a Russell 2000 index fund or Apple stock or Ethereum, you want to buy close to a near-term low and then later sell it close to a near-term high. Well, that is more difficult to do than it sounds, and it's just one reason that stock, ETF, and mutual fund investors don't build wealth. One other thing I'll mention as you're trying to patch together your first real estate down payment is I-bonds. They currently pay a guaranteed 7%, and the way that they work is that the interest rate they pay you is the CPI inflation rate plus a fixed rate on top of that. And you can get I-bonds at treasurydirect.gov, but there is a $10,000 annual limit that you can put into I-bonds. And another disadvantage is that I-bonds, they cannot be purchased and held in a traditional or Roth IRA, Mitrel. The I-bonds have to be held in a taxable account, but that might work for you in this case, Mitrel, since it's a shorter term hold. Hopefully it's a shorter term hold anyway, until you've built up your $100K cash to get your real estate and hopefully be off to the races, getting paid 5 ways. Another disadvantage of I-bonds is that there is an interest penalty if they are redeemed for cash in the first 5 years. What they do is knock off 3 months of your earned interest. I hope that you found at least one insight on those options that helps you out there, Mitrel. The next question comes from Kevin. He asked this one quite a while ago.
Keith, this is Kevin Attride from Dayton, Ohio. Thank you for an amazing podcast. It's now my go-to for all things financial independence. I had a question for you. So as I begin building my single-family rental assets, what are the forward indicators you use to select your MSAs? Typically, population growth and employment are 2 of the indicators I look at, but I'm so often looking at them in arrears, and I'd like to look at something that's forward-thinking, knowing that past performance isn't always indicative of future performance. So any guidance you can provide around metrics and where you get those would be extremely helpful. Thank you.
All right, so Kevin asked about the forward-looking indicators to select MSAs. He typically looks at population growth and employment. And that is a rather astute question, Kevin. Yes, you're looking at some of the right measures for really that tide that floats a real estate market up. So first we want to think about landlord-friendly states. Yes, the Midwest and South has a preponderance of them, but there are outliers. You'll also find pretty favorable eviction processes for landlords in Pennsylvania, Texas, and Arizona. When it comes to forward-looking real estate indicators and their sources, first, let me give you two resources that almost everyone knows about, and then we'll drill down deeper. The NAR publishes forecasts for home sales and prices and other market trends, and their reports give you future real estate market insight at both the national level and the local level. And then Zillow, they offer forecasts too on the housing market with things like home values and rents and some other market indicators. Now, one indicator and one place that a lot of people don't know to look at, Kevin, is your ability to discover upcoming government infrastructure programs. Think about learning where the next new highway intersection or highway interchange is going to be built. Or perhaps it's a seaport expansion project or a new bridge that is going to be built in, say, 5 years. Well, there are a lot of places where you can find out that information ahead of time. And unlike stock investing, it is completely legal, totally all right to learn about this ahead of time. You can get a heads up on where the next bridge is going to be built and how that can make nearby property values rise. That's not considered illegal insider information in real estate. So you can check the websites of government agencies responsible for upcoming infrastructure development in your target state or region. And that area's, say, Department of Transportation, they make this public so that contractors can engage in the bidding process for major infrastructure projects. And these are known as government procurement websites. For example, in Illinois, that's under an illinois.gov website. And these sources can be kind of dry and wonky, but putting in the work over there, that can help you see the future in a certain region. Now, major news outlets and just regular old school legacy media television channels like good old WPHL in Philadelphia or KMSP in Minneapolis or anywhere, they often report on upcoming projects and government initiatives as well, something like, say, an airport expansion. Now, if you happen to live in Investor Advantage area, Kevin, and well, you do, Dayton, Ohio, joining an in real life industry association that focuses on infrastructure development, that can really give you some direction and some foresight, and you're going to grow your network too. You're going to meet people. That'll give you access to upcoming projects, as will attending public meetings like town hall meetings. And then finally, the U.S. Census Bureau and other sources, they make all kinds of population projections, and that really helps you see the future. And hey, you might as well use the census's resources since your tax dollars are paying for it after all. And those industry associations and public meetings, they often use and apply those population projections to the major upcoming projects. So there is more, but I think it's a good bit there. I hope that helps you out, Kevin. Today, I'm bringing you the show from Anchorage, Alaska. Next week, I'll be bringing it to you from Las Vegas, Nevada. And in 2 weeks, I'll be bringing you the show from Phoenix, Arizona. So Anchorage, Las Vegas, and Phoenix, that is the largest city in the 49th, 36th, and 48th states admitted to the union, respectively. I'm only hanging out in the big cities. And only a remorseless geography nerd like me would break it down that way, wouldn't I? Yes, we'll be constructing makeshift mobile GRE recording studios coming up. Hey, if you've got a question that you'd like me to answer, go to getricheducation.com/contact. That's where you can either write a message or leave a voice message listener question, just like Kevin did there. I answer more of your listener questions next. I'm Keith Weinhold. You're listening to episode 445 of Get Rich Education. With JWB Real Estate Capital, Jacksonville real estate has outperformed the stock market by 44% over the last 20 years. It's proven to be a more stable asset, especially during recessions. Their vertically integrated strategy has led to 79% more home price appreciation compared to the average Jacksonville investor since 2013. JWB is ready to help your money make money, and to make it easy for everyday investors, get started at jwbrealestate.com/GRE. That's jwbrealestate.com/GRE. GRE listeners can't stop talking about their service from Ridge Lending Group and MLS 42056. They've provided our tribe with more loans than anyone. They're truly a top lender for beginners and veterans. It's where I go to get my own loans for single-family rental property up to 4plexes. So start your pre-qualification and you can chat with President Chaley Ridge personally. They'll even deliver your custom plan for growing your real estate portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com.
What's up, everyone? This is HGTV's Tariq El Musa. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold and don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Grateful to have you here with me. Before we return to your listener questions, thanks to this week's sponsors. They support us, so please consider supporting them. That is Ridge Lending Group. Consider your next mortgage loan for income property there and see the difference that a lender that works specifically with investors like you can make. They serve almost all 50 states now. That is President Chaley Ridge and all the good-looking people over there at ridgelendinggroup.com. Then there's JWB Real Estate Capital, income property specialists that provide you with the actual investor advantage real estate that you can buy in bustling, fast-growing Jacksonville. They're the providers. The all-around good guy, Greg Cohen, and the team at JWB. They always have good hair days over there, too. They really make it easy for you. You can find your next cash flow property at jwbrealestate.com/GRE. And finally, there's Mid-South Homebuyers, providing you some of the best rent ratios in the entire South in Memphis and Little Rock. They've got that service that you've been raving about for years now. That is Terry Kerr, Liz Brody, and all the fine peeps over there at Mid-South that shake your hand, look you in the eye, have a symmetrical smile, and even regularly recite your name mid-sentence for you. You can get started at midsouthhomebuyers.com. And I have been inside the physical offices of all three of those sponsors that I just mentioned. If your company is interested in advertising on GRE, let us know. We'd like to check you out first. Just like listener questions, you can also indicate that on the same page. Let us know at getricheducation.com/contact. If you look closely, you'll see the advertising inquiry area there. Connor asked me a question. Keith, absolutely love your videos. I live in expensive Southern California, Orange County. Would you recommend my first property be a primary that I house hack or I invest in an out-of-state rental? Thanks, Connor. Okay, Connor, well, there's a lot to consider. Let's look at the SoCal house hack. As you're surely already aware, real estate prices and tax rates are both very high in California. California also has a Tenant Protection Act enacted in 2019 that puts strict eviction laws into place. You might have rent control there too. Now, as a SoCal house hacker, that could, of course, take the form of buying one big single-family home where you live in one of the rooms and rent out the others. And the younger that you are, the more likely it is that you're tolerant living with roommates. If you want to stay alone or with your spouse or whatever and you want privacy, then you would instead get into a duplex, triplex, or fourplex and live in one of the units. And in any one of those single-family homes up to fourplex, you can use an FHA loan and pay just 3.5% down, or a VA loan if you have VA benefits and pay 0% down. And with either of those low down payment programs, though, you must live on site, usually for at least a year. FHA recently approved 40-year mortgage loans, and they're going to roll out next month. Yeah. In Orange County, California, with really high prices, it might take a fixer-upper type home to make it affordable. And if you aren't handy, that's a disadvantage on the house hack. SoCal is simply one of the most disadvantaged places in the nation for long-term rental property, although there can still be some ways to make it work there. And then if you go out of state, you can make it really passive. It won't be an active thing for you to do like it would be for you there. in Orange County. Now, the downside of buying an out-of-state rental, like through GRE Marketplace, is that it's going to take a 20 to 25% down payment, but you can still find respectable properties in safe neighborhoods in, say, Memphis for as little as $100 to $120K. That means you might not have to come out of pocket for that much more than you would with a SoCal rental, even if you had a lower down payment there, like with those programs I talked about. And of course, the big advantages of the out-of-state rental are low purchase prices, high rents, advantageous landlord-tenant laws, and your property is already renovated or it's brand new and it is turnkey property managed if you so choose. That's exactly why a lot of people are choosing out-of-state properties at GRE Marketplace. Those are some of the major trade-offs. Connor, thanks for the question. The next question comes from Jesse in Reno, Nevada. Jesse asks, with high inflation for 2 years and cyclical trends entrenched, more nations making foreign deals outside the dollar, and the Treasury printing dollars like mad, I cannot believe the price for a shopping cart full of groceries at Safeway anymore. Are we headed for a hyperinflationary period within the next decade? Okay, well, that's an interesting question, Jesse. Inflation is an awful malady. It disproportionately affects the lower classes more than the upper classes. But do I believe that there's any significant chance of hyperinflation in the next decade, Jesse? Let me squarely answer that for you. But first of all, a lot of people, not necessarily you, Jesse, but a lot of people, they throw around the term hyperinflation without really knowing what it means at all. And a consensus of economists, they define hyperinflation as an inflation rate of 50% or more every month. Yes, month. And with compounding, that would be inflation of more than 600% per year, not the closer to 6% reported CPI inflation that we've had lately. Maybe real inflation is 12. We could very well have longer term waves of recurring inflation. In America, our debt to GDP ratio is high. It's about 120% right now. Back in 1990, for comparison, it was just 55%. Now, our debt to GDP ratio, it also hit 120% way back in the 1940s. But that was as a result of us having to pay for World War II. And the productivity of the 1950s quickly brought that ratio down. Here's the problem. Today's 120% is not due to war. It's due to all these politicians' various accumulated promises over time. And that includes continuous military spending. And, historically, every single fiat currency ends with the end of that currency. Every single one goes to die. The British pound is the world's oldest currency that is still in use today. But to get to hyperinflation, it generally takes two key factors. All right, first, a nation needs to have debts denominated in a currency that they can't print. That nation can't print their way out of that debt. Now, for emerging markets, it's often dollar-based debt that they have, and those nations cannot print dollars. That's the problem. 100 years ago, Weimar Germany, they had gold-based war reparations. All right, well, that was their problem because you cannot print gold. So they printed massive amounts of their currency. And in more modern times, Venezuela and Zimbabwe have experienced hyperinflation. So yes, it happens, but it's certainly not common. So that's the first reason. And the second key reason that hyperinflation occurs is when there's no foreign demand for your currency, so you hyperinflate it. So to create hyperinflation, it takes a tremendous amount of printing plus no demand for that currency. Those are two big factors that lead to it. And America still has foreign demand for our dollar, and there's still a lot of debt denominated in the dollar globally, a lot. Well, that represents demand for it. And since the U.S. can print its own currency, we're not very likely to default on our total of $32 trillion of debt is what we've accumulated now. We're not very likely to default on that at all. So we are motivated to let inflation keep running, debasing our debt, and that inflation will run at whatever fluctuating rate, Jesse. So to answer your question, I don't think you're going to get any grocery shopping relief there in Reno, Nevada. But no, there will not be any hyperinflation in the United States in the next decade. And as far as the prolonged elevated inflation that we're having as a listener, I think you know how to get on top of that and beat that by now. Own real assets. If you own a house, have a 30-year mortgage on it. Don't have it paid off. You need a mortgage to benefit the most. Thanks for the question, Jesse. Our last question comes from Zach in Claremore, Oklahoma. Zach asks, Keith, is there such a thing as being over-leveraged? Would you finance everything you can as long as you can create arbitrage? Oh, that's a great question, Zach. Arbitrage basically just means profit. The short answer is yes, I would. I would finance everything up as much as I could without being over-leveraged. Now, what over-leverage means in general out in the larger business world is that you borrowed too much money in relation to your ability to pay it back. All right, now in real estate, being over-leveraged means that you take on so much debt that you can't make your monthly payments on your principal, interest, and operating expenses. So as long as my properties are cash flow positive, even by a little margin, I have found no limit as to how much I would finance. Zach, let me use an example. Say that you buy a rental duplex with $4,000 of monthly rent income. Your mortgage and all of your long-term operating expenses, say they're $5,000. Well, that leaves you with a negative cash flow hole of $1,000 every month. Well, $1,000 per month hole, that's a $12,000 each year hole that you have dug. If you're financially precarious elsewhere in your life, well, that can be a difficult hole to fill in, and you could descend into delinquency when you miss your first payment on that property, and then deeper into foreclosure when you're several months behind, and then the bank takes over your property, and you lose your property, you could lose your credit score, and you could lose the ability to get new loans for years because you were over-leveraged. You've borrowed too much money in relation to your ability to pay it back since your rent income was $4,000 and your expenses were $5,000. Well, when you buy right, that's not likely to happen. First of all, your mortgage loan underwriter, they're going to check and make sure that you have enough income and enough reserves to meet their qualification standards before you get the loan, the mortgage there in the first place. All right, so that is one check against becoming over-leveraged, but yet things could still go wrong. For one thing, with FHA loans, your debt-to-income ratio can be an eye-popping maximum of 57%, and you can still get the loan, but you're usually going to be buying your out-of-state rental property with a conventional loan. Now, instead of becoming over-leveraged, you would buy in the opposite scenario, projecting positive cash flow from day one. So on your duplex instead, if you had just $4,200 of rent income and $4,000 of expenses, well, you've only got $200 of cash flow, but that's a good enough cushion in most cases. And like I've described on previous episodes, historically, your rent income rises faster than your expenses since your mortgage principal and interest payment stays fixed. And that's why over time, you often widen that delta from $200 cash flow so that it just keeps widening to a greater and greater cushion. So to review, you're unlikely to find yourself over-leveraged if your property's income exceeds your expenses on day one when you have predominantly fixed-rate loans. And then another measure of protection is when you own properties in multiple job growth markets, in multiple states even, you're better protected against any changes in the law or regulations or changes in that region's economy or even any detrimental disruption to your property management in each of your chosen investment areas. I dislike over leverage, but I do like high leverage because leverage makes compound interest feel really slow when you see what's really happening. And it is best to finance your properties even though mortgage rates aren't as low as they were 2 years ago. Look at it this way. With 20% down, you could buy 5 finance properties instead of 1 all cash. And over time, 5 properties appreciating, they're going to build you more wealth than having just 1 appreciating. If the properties, though, say they don't cash flow with only 20% down, All right, well then get 3 properties with 33% down each. That's going to accelerate your wealth building and help you control the mortgage at the same time. And then if mortgage rates go down, you can still refinance. And if rates don't go down, well then you're going to be glad that you bought multiple properties instead of one. Thanks for the question, Zach. I hope you enjoyed listener questions today. I haven't done them for a while. If you did, please go ahead and tell a friend about the show. Also, if you've ever wanted to tell me what you think about the show, there's a great way for you to do that, and I'm going to see it and read it myself. You know, I've recently learned that in Apple Podcast Germany, we have only 3 podcast reviews in that entire nation on that platform, and that prompted me to ask you, whatever nation you're in, to please, you don't have to, but if you'd be so kind, leave a podcast review. When you do that, it not only helps our show reach more people, but I actually do read your review of the show, so I get that feedback myself. So if you like what I'm doing here, I'd be grateful if you went ahead, whatever your podcast platform is, and just go ahead and Google how to leave an Apple Podcast review or how to leave a Spotify review. And go ahead and do that. Leave a rating and review for the Get Rich Education podcast, and I'd be grateful. Well, hey, I hope you found one or more listener questions today that really relate to you or your interests or your unlimited wealth building potential. Thanks in advance for telling a friend about the show and for your rating and review. Until next week, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.